Ladies and gentlemen, I think we're getting the last of our seats. Thank you so much for coming out and joining us today. We're very excited about these exhibitions that we're going to share with you today, and that we've got our guest speaker, Karan Feder, here with us. First of all, thank you, ACI members. Of course, none of this would happen without your incredible vision and support and ongoing enthusiasm. We have two beautiful exhibitions upstairs. If you haven't had an opportunity to view them yet, we encourage you to please go through the exhibitions after our conversation today. Before I get started, we did discover there's a rhinestone button that was lost off of somebody's beautiful ensemble. So this will be up in the sound booth at the end if you discover you've lost your beautiful rhinestone button. My name is Helen Jean. I have the great honor of being the Jackie Dorrance Curator for Fashion Design here at the museum. We have over 9,000 extraordinary pieces that speak to our important history of fashion and our connection with each other. And to help tell that story, not only do we have this extraordinary collection, we have a wonderful library, and it has really great resources, especially for our students. That is a place where you can access the full Vogue archive. That is every page from every Vogue that has been scanned since 1891 through current editions. But also in our library, we have just a wonderful array of books that speak to all different areas of fashion, and our librarian is especially invested in fashion, which we're very delighted by. And brought over a couple books to make sure everyone was aware. We've got The Secret Lives of Color, and this is going to be part of the April book study club that Jessie Lopez, our librarian, produces. So it's The Secret Lives of Color, and that is the April book club. And then the May book club will be Eyeliner, A Cultural History. So just some fascinating conversations to have in the sphere of adorning ourselves. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Karan Feder. Karan is joining us from Las Vegas. We met online probably a year or so ago and have been emailing over the last year. Karan is the driving force behind this incredible exhibition that you're going to see upstairs. She has an incredible encyclopedic knowledge of Barbie and Barbie's deep relationship with fashion and all those fascinating interconnections. And we are very lucky to have Karan with us today. This evening, if you are able to come back to the museum at 7 o'clock, Karan will be joining us. We're having a conversation about the science and history of the color pink. We've got some professors from ASU, one from the Life Sciences Department to talk about bird feather evolution, and another, a color expert and historian that'll be talking about pink in the broader artistic world. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome Karan Feder to give us a tour through Barbie, a cultural icon.
Thank you all. I'm so excited about this opportunity, and just in my brief moments with you, I feel like you're my people. Anyone who loves fashion is part of my tribe, and anyone who devotes as much time as I believe you all do to fashion is also on my list of favorite folks. So I'm thrilled about this opportunity. I want to thank the ACI too. You all, it's a really fascinating group I'm just only now learning about, but I think the Phoenix Art Museum is especially lucky to have you all making sure that their textile and costume collection is as excellent as it is moving forward. So kudos and great work. So this presentation will dive into sort of the behind-the-scenes development of the exhibition and then the accompanying best-selling book. So my early professional background was spent in Hollywood as a costume designer, and we ended up moving to Las Vegas, where I discovered the Liberace Museum and the fabulous costume collection the collection of costumes that Liberace wore on stage, our house at the Liberace Museum. And it struck me how little that this genre of costume is represented in museum settings, this cabaret genre of costume. And I sort of made a right turn off my career path and really wanted to study and preserve, interpret, and showcase this style of costume going forward. And so in that vein, I've written a number of books about stage costume, including a book about Liberace's costume, a book about Elvis Presley's costume, Marilyn Monroe, and I also wrote an important book about the Folies Bergère in Las Vegas, that production show. I also work as a costume historian and independent curator in Las Vegas with the Mob Museum and the David Copperfield Museum and Library of the Conjuring Arts. So before I traveled to Barbie Land, I was happily spending most of my time at the Nevada State Museum in Las Vegas. And my mission there was to develop the collection to better represent the legacy of Las Vegas as the entertainment capital of the world. And that was an incredibly fun project. Here I am pictured wrestling with a fashion mannequin during a dressing process. So if we were asked to offer a visual identity for Las Vegas, these women might come to mind, right? Pictured are traditional showgirls dressed in traditional cabaret costumes. And it may appear they have little on, but in fact, these costumes, it's not unusual for them to include 10 separate elements to make up a single ensemble. And what's fascinating to me about this particular slide is that represented are women from 1964, 1970, and 2001. Yet I think most of us would be hard-pressed to be able to date these costumes. Because in fact, the materials used and the silhouettes have been the same for about 100 years now. The cabaret production with the biggest footprint at the Nevada State Museum is the Folies Bergère production show that played at the Tropicana Hotel for nearly 50 years, from 59 till 2009. And the State Museum acquired 8,000 pieces from that single production show, which offers a really interesting evolution of costume between that period of time, stage costume between that period of time. Another interesting thing about the Folies Bergère is just 3 different costume designers designed every single edition of that show. And this illustration is a postcard from 1961, and it depicts the Fountain Theater where the Folies Bergère played. And this is a unique theater for the era, mid-century, mid-20th century. It has a proscenium stage, but on either side of the stage, there are mini elevated stages that curved around and sort of wrapped around the audience for a really intimate experience. This wonderful photograph depicts a scene from the 1980 edition of the Folies Bergère, and this is a scene that imagined an evening at the Palace of Versailles in the 18th century, and the State Museum takes care of all of these costumes. And in my interviews with cast and crew, the folks tell me that there was choreography for the backstage as well as the onstage for this number because of the immense scale of these skirts. There were 8 of these, and it was an old-fashioned backstage, so there wasn't a lot of room. So cast and crew had choreography backstage and as well as onstage, and everyone to a one said that it was much more interesting to watch what was going on backstage than onstage. And so here's an illuminating look at the actual scale of that skirt. And once the foundational panels are on, it's like 12 feet in width, each one of those. Here's a detailed look at the bodice and the poof wig headdress that went with the Marie Antoinette number. And that headdress is about 4 feet tall. And so just for a moment, let's imagine balancing that thing on your head as you're dancing. And the showgirl is pictured with her wardrobe mistress. And this edition was designed by Nolan Miller, who you may recognize from his work with television. He's an Emmy Award-winning designer for television, most notably for Dynasty. And we mention him, yes, he is represented in the Barbie exhibit. There's a piece from your own collection that is currently on display from Nolan Miller in the Barbie exhibit. So then, of course, COVID happened, and my life was turned upside down, and my institutional duties practically disappeared. And this is shows you how Las Vegas dealt with the pandemic. And you see a showgirl pictured wearing her matching face mask. Someone in the wardrobe department made her a masking face mask. And of course, the Caesar statue is wearing a humongous gold lame face mask. I was working with a man named David Porcello at the State Museum, and David, for his entire life, has been collecting vintage fashion. And he tells this great story that when, for his 8th birthday, his mother asked what he would like, and David says, "I've had my eye on this vintage dress at the Goodwill." And so this is a lifelong obsession of this man. And not only did he collect vintage life-size fashion, but he also collected vintage Barbie fashion. And this was the first time that I created this break between Barbie the doll and Barbie fashion. David never was really interested in the doll, but he was interested in the fashion. So this is a picture of David at the State Museum doing some sort of work. So David's vintage Barbie collection, fashion collection, never really fit within the confines, the mission statement of the State Museum. And so I never really had an opportunity to really study it and dive into it while working there. So when COVID happened, I realized I was going to have a big chunk of time. And I really wanted to think about it more deeply, and I wondered if I could figure out a way to showcase the collection and share his collection with the public. And this is a picture of David was organizing his collection one day, and I believe this is the era of Barbie dolls from the 70s and 80s. So David's collecting mission was to collect every single piece of fashion produced for Barbie from 59 through 99. And he was most interested in collecting pieces that were outside of the packaging. He felt that if pieces had been played with, they had more life and thus more value. And of course, this exercise is much more time-consuming for a collector, but there's something that I get about that mission. And this is a great example from his collection. The Winter Holiday Ensemble includes this really wonderful white vinyl jacket. And you see that someone, probably a mother, has handwritten the initials of the owner of this jacket on the inside to prevent loss, I imagine. But I just love, and that's just a great example of when something comes out of the package, the sort of the inherent life that will happen. And the illustration is of that little jacket, and you see that's an illustration from 1958 from one of the original catalog pages that Mattel used to sell the fashion. And you see that it sold for $3.50, this ensemble, all the pieces you see there. The footprint of David's collection expanded over the years, and some of these charming ancillary objects you'll see in the exhibition, including these wonderful carry cases. So the two you're looking at here are made of vinyl, and screen printed on top of the vinyl are these fantabulous illustrations of Barbie fashion. And I just adore these cases. And these early carry cases were sometimes double, two sides you'd open up, sometimes they're a single side. And both of these are from the early 60s. The later cases from the 80s and 90s, they sort of take on more of a furniture or armoire heaviness to them, and no longer are the images on the front illustrations, but they are photographs. So because David and I were so well versed in fashion history, we settled on this exhibition concept that would interpret Barbie fashion by juxtaposing life-size fashion of the same era. And we felt that this would provide the perfect reference in terms of defining and revealing how the behind-the-scenes Barbie team was looking at culture for their inspiration. So this is an interesting example where we see a life-size two-piece lace pantsuit and then Barbie's interpretation of that trend. And our original concept for the exhibition was that this would be focused on Barbie's clothes closet. We didn't want to get into a conversation about Barbie's physical form. We felt that we could tell the story of Barbie's cultural significance by simply revealing certain things about the evolution of her wardrobe. And so pictured here is a fascinating evolution of 30 years, 60s, 70s, and 90s. And it's fun to see the progression just within that short period of time, I feel. So in my research, I relied on photographic documentation, advertisements, fashion magazines, designer archives. And one of my colleagues describes my work for this project as next level picture research. And thinking back, it was only because I had so much time and it was COVID and I was at home in front of the computer that I in fact could spend so much time looking at everything I could find. So this is one fascinating example where we see Barbie dressed in her red flare coat. This is an early 60s top coat. And flanking her on either side, the black and whites are pictures from Cristobal Balenciaga's, a few different eras of the collection during the 50s. And the similarities here are found in that fantastic melon sleeve, the shortened melon sleeve. There is the mandarin collar with the single bow knot at center front. And of course, the main detail that's mimicked is that trapeze shape. So, you know, the Barbie folks were really looking at the forward trends of the moment. This is another wonderful example. So the eccentric topper is from Givenchy. And then it's my theory that Barbie's hat from the commuter set ensemble is in fact inspired by this Givenchy number. So in the midst of these discovered inspirations that Barbie had, I felt it was a perfect opportunity to briefly introduce a few notable professional fashion designers. And you'll see a few of those folks introduced in the exhibition, but in the book, I'm really allowed to dive into and feature more of these artisans. And so this is a spread from Barbie Takes the Catwalk, and here we're introduced to the French couturier Yves Saint Laurent. And Saint Laurent's collection, Spring-Summer of '88 collection, was inspired by Van Gogh paintings. And so you'll see the two ladies on the runway on the right. The yellow jacket is inspired by Van Gogh's Sunflowers, and on the right, the violet one by Irises. And it's fascinating, isn't it, to take a look at Barbie's ensemble and see how she's been influenced not just by the fabrication of the Saint Laurent runway, but also even in the styling with the same sort of picture hat and the nude legs with the shoes. The whole thing seems like someone over there at Mattel actually saw the Saint Laurent runway show. Charlotte Johnson is the first designer who was charged with creating Barbie's fashion. And she's pictured here in the center. And her mission, her charge in this position, was to reflect culture, not to get ahead. Barbie was never going to be fashion forward necessarily, but she would reflect what was popular at any moment in time in fashion. And so to do this, she would look at folks on the street, she would go to boutiques, she was reading fashion magazines, and she was looking at runway shows. And she tells this great story about one of her fashion research trips. She was in Paris, and she was sitting at a cafe, and she noticed a woman walk past her on the street wearing a Dior bubble. And what she meant by that was a Dior bubble dress. And the bubble part of this dress, of course, is found in the bouffant skirt shape, that silhouette. And Charlotte was so struck by that she created a look like that for Barbie in the 1959 offering. And what's fascinating to me is that is no easy feat for those of you, and I think there are lots of you out there who know how to create patterns for such a silhouette, that there had to be an underlining to this. It's not an easy pattern to draft. So Charlotte wasn't looking for the easy way out here. She just wanted to make sure that Barbie looked good no matter what. This is an example of the Barbie designers looking at cultural celebrities for inspiration. So we see that on the left, that is a picture of First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy on an official visit to India in 1961. And we see that the Barbie team have in fact been very influenced by Jacqueline's Oleg Cassini dress and mimic not just the color, but some of the significant details of that look. Even the styling with the pearl necklace. And a really fascinating discovery, the picture on the left is from the Sears catalog. And you see even the Sears catalog had an Oleg Cassini Jacqueline knockoff at that period of time. Even more fascinating is that the Sears catalog labeled this dress the Belle silhouette, and the Barbie dresses are called the Belle dress. Now, even the Sears catalog offers that dress in both apricot and light blue, just like Barbie. Now, there's no way for me to know which came first, but everyone was copying Oleg Cassini at this point in time, I guess. So hopefully as you tour the exhibition, you won't even notice the doll stands. It was very important to me that the stands not distract or distort the fashion. And the stands that you can buy as a consumer on the market do distract and distort from my perspective. So the team created a series of various sized stands to achieve that. So it appears as if they're just floating there, standing. So there's rarely enough room in the confines of an exhibition to impart the totality of one's research on any particular topic. And about halfway through the exhibition, I realized that I probably had enough words for a book. And so this is one example. This is taken from the book. Now, this doll is featured in the exhibition, but the narrative behind the doll, there was not room in the exhibit for it. So this doll's outfit is called Zocko, spelled Z-O-K-K-O, exclamation point. And I wasn't familiar with that term, so I Googled it. And I landed on a television program from the late 60s that was produced by the BBC, and it ran for just a few seasons, and it was described as indescribable. The television show was hosted by a talking pinball machine, and there were various crazy segments in it, but one of the segments was what was called a space fiction segment. And there was a female character in the lead of the space fiction segment. And so my guess is that at one point in time in the mid-60s, Mattel partnered with the BBC to help promote this space fiction segment of the Zocko television program. Now, unfortunately, there's like maybe 2 surviving episodes from that television program. And within the Mattel's archives, there's nothing that references Zocko at all. So we don't know for sure, but I think it's a good guess. So my agent pitched my proposed book idea to a number of publishers. This was before the movie came out. And I didn't get any really positive feedback on it. And in fact, the prevailing notion was that people aren't into that stuff anymore, and Barbie isn't really relevant. So, pass. But eventually we did land a publisher. Weldon Owen is the publisher of Barbie Takes the Catwalk, and they are an official licensee of Mattel. And what that would mean for me would be that the book was authorized, which meant that it would be curated by Mattel. And I was a little nervous about that concept, to have a corporation curating your research. But it turned out that their feedback was really kind of fascinating. So as an example, there's a chapter in the book that talks about the psychedelic movement in fashion. And I had titled that chapter Magic Mushrooms. That was vetoed. I also was not able to use, there are a series of descriptive words that were a problem. One was Reagan era, which surprised me, but that was vetoed. I couldn't use the word exotic, and I could not use the word unisex, but I could say gender fluid. So I think that these are all sort of dog whistles in our culture today, and that if I would pitch the same book to Mattel in 5 years, I doubt these things would have pushed anyone's buttons. So pictured is Barbie wearing her iconic Enchanted Evening dress from 1961. And yes, her stole is a real fur. It is real rabbit. And speaking of real fur, I've inserted the very first Sears exclusive for Barbie, which is that mink coat. It's a real mink coat. And it's sold for $9.99, which was like exorbitant, right, for Barbie fashion. So among my many very interesting and entertaining research discoveries has to do with this Barbie look called Barbie and the Rockers Fashions. This from 1986. So pictured on the right is Madonna, the singer Madonna, as she appeared at the very first Video Music Awards. And during that performance, she sang Like a Virgin. And it was a super scandalous and memorable rendition of her song. And she wears this, her version of a wedding dress, which is, a lingerie as outerwear, sort of a rebellious nod to a wedding dress, but in her own style. And then this outfit happens for Barbie, which seems to me a quite controversial choice for Barbie, but I expect that this look for Barbie was approved based on its style elements rather than any of the performers' particular cultural statements being made on stage at that point in time. Photographing the dressed dolls for the book was a learning process. Again, I wanted the dolls to appear as if they were standing on their own, and I really wanted to personify them. And so in this technique, I've inserted a metal rod hidden behind Barbie's leg, and then that is stuck through like 8 inches of ethaphone. And that allows her to just stand there just long enough where you can get a good shot. And so here we are posing Barbie in her red flare look with photographer Jeff Scheid, who took a lot of the photos for the book. And for me, the narrative in the exhibition, the fashion narrative, comes full circle with the Moschino collection for Spring-Summer 2015, designed by Jeremy Scott. And Jeremy tells us that his inspiration, his muse for that collection was the Barbie doll, which is exactly opposite that the Barbie doll had taken up until that point in the culture. Up until that point, it was Barbie's job to be reflective of the culture, to not influence culture. Now we are seeing Barbie at a point in her own identity where she is mature enough that she has become an influencer in her own right, and now professional fashion designers are looking to Barbie for inspiration. And in this case, we see Jeremy was, he was inspired by a Barbie look 25 years earlier. Barbie, this is the Perfume Pretty Barbie from 1988. And a number of people have asked me if the Barbie exhibition team and the Barbie movie team were working together because the timing of the presentation was so perfectly aligned. But in fact, we weren't. As I understand it, Greta Gerwig started writing the screenplay with her partner at the very beginning of COVID, about the same time that we started developing the exhibition. So we were working in separate silos, but like I say, there was obviously something in the zeitgeist that we had both identified and picked up on it. And the phenomenal popularity, again, I think is something that no one could have predicted. And in fact, what we're like 6 or 7 months later now, that the Barbie movie phenomenon is considered a unicorn in that it is unlikely that its success is unlikely to ever be replicated. So the success of the movie was, of course, great for the exhibit and the book, and a number of people were reaching out asking me how I felt about the costumes, the life-size costumes for the people depicting Barbie dolls in the movie. And designed by Jacqueline Duran was the designer for the film's movies. And I thought she did a fantastic job. When I heard about the movie and I hadn't seen any stills from it, I was worried that it could easily slip into the cartoony vein and it would have been a little too playful and comedic. But I thought Jacqueline's costumes were super sophisticated and very well done. And I feel she deserves all of her accolades on her work for this film. I was particularly pleased to see that the House of Chanel was well represented in the movie, and Jacqueline Duran and Chanel collaborated on a number of looks for Margot Robbie playing Barbie in the movie, and here are 3 perfect pink numbers. And there is significance in selecting Chanel as a design collaborator for the movie. And Barbie scored her very first Chanel suit in 1980. And a decade later, when Lagerfeld was sort of playing with a lot of the Chanel legacies, we end up with this sort of mini version of the Chanel suit. And Barbie was all over that. And she gets her own version of it, even with the swag belt. But of course, Barbie's belt is initialized with a B on it. So this adventure into Barbie Land has been thrilling for me, and I've gained a great respect for the behind-the-scenes folks that were responsible for developing her wardrobe. I really do think it is a significant look at the evolution of American fashion during this period of time, especially 59 through 99. So I thank you for allowing me to speak to it today. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Yes. Yes, it is true. They're fantastic. There's a series, I believe, 4 dolls, 4 different Poochie outfits. And they were not made by Mattel. Mattel licensed another manufacturer to make those for them, similar to the deal they had with Sears to make some stuff for them. But because there weren't a lot of those made, but they are in fact, super valuable. Even in David's collection, he doesn't have any of those, but they're really wonderful. They're literal knockoffs with the little helmets and everything, yeah, and the boots, the Courage boots even. Yeah, really fantastic.
We've got one way up in the back. Let me get up there to you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. It's a
Yeah,
real
you're welcome.
pleasure. So one question I had for you was looking around the exhibit. One thing, I really love the fashion. I love the way it's organized. I love the stands. But were you kind of hindered on how you could display the dolls, like the actual physical dolls, like what dolls you used? Because I know that you worked with David and you worked with Mattel. So kind of my confusion sometimes when looking at the exhibit is, were we only using David's doll? Because there's that one picture where you see all them kind of laid out. Or was it dolls that Mattel provided to you and you put fashions in them? And were all the fashions already intact from David? Or were some of those also helped out by Mattel?
So Mattel has a very limited three-dimensional archive. The only thing in terms of 59 through 99 that we borrowed from Mattel was number 1. The rest of the things come from David's collection, and our goal with dressing each doll was to make sure that the doll predated the outfit. So all of the vintage dolls are in fact from David's collection. The more modern dolls from 2000 forward, there are some dolls that come from the Mattel archive, especially the super modern ones. They come at some point in time. I'm not sure what that point is, but Mattel realized that their institutional archive was missing, and they started saving stuff. So before that point in time, there was, other than in the exhibit, you will in fact see those commercials are from Mattel's archive. They did save those, so that was fun. But that is so keen of you to make this observation, and you are absolutely correct. Some of the big scale photographs that live behind the dolls are the modern replicas of the vintage dolls. So, for instance, Mattel has gotten into this fad of releasing 1960 dolls in 2020s, right? So they remake that doll, but the doll, it has a different look. It looks like it was made in 2020. So, in fact, some of those photographic images that you see in the exhibit, like, for instance, I can't remember. There are a series of them, but it's a doll that was originally made in the 60s. The doll, the three-dimensional doll from the 60s is on display, but the photograph is the replica of that doll that was released later on in time. Does that answer that question?
Thank you so much. Sorry, I don't mean to hug, but in terms of like your usage, in terms of like did you feel like you could only use the dolls that David had, or did Mattel offer to also lend them? Or you said that they were missing a large chunk of their archive, so it sounds like it was a good collaboration after all.
We were not. The original goal was to just feature David's collection, yes. But it was my fault that there were some things that I wanted to feature that were not found in David's collection, that we did collect along the way, but we were not able to get them from Mattel because Mattel sometimes didn't even know. They were like, didn't even recognize an outfit. So we weren't really limited. Now, I will say that as we got closer to the 2020s, Mattel really had an idea of what they wanted to show. Basically, as soon as the dolls with the different silhouettes, the actual doll, when the doll silhouette changed, they really wanted to make sure that that was included in the exhibit. Of course, I wasn't particularly interested in that narrative, but that was super important to Mattel that we include that. So those selections, the more modern selections, probably Mattel had a heavier hand on.
Like we've got one down in the front. As I'm working my way there, I'm going to ask a quick question. In your presentation and in the exhibition, we see fashion designers Oscar de la Renta, Yves Saint Laurent, Bob Mackie, Jeremy Scott from Moschino. Can you give us some other names of designers that have sought the value of being part of Barbie's universe?
Well, we met Oleg Cassini earlier with Jackie O's dress. Balenciaga, I feel, is represented. Who else? I think I referenced Halston and
Did these other designers, were they participating in these looks, or those were more references
no.
that perhaps Charlotte Johnson
Yes,
was
thank
making?
you for that question. No, they were not participating. In fact, the first time we see an official collaboration between Barbie doll and a professional fashion designer is with Oscar de la Renta in the 80s, 1983. And that was the first time where we actually see a fashion designer's name, a credit on the box. And that was with Oscar, and there are a series of 4, I think, outfits that were designed in tandem with the designer. And by that, I mean, as I understand it, Barbie's fashion designer, Carol Spencer, took a few sketches over to the team at Oscar and presented them for approval. And then those are the looks. And they were designed, Carol kept in mind the traditional Oscar look. And then I guess Oscar tweaked them a little bit, but it was in fact a real collaboration between designer and designer to create that very first Oscar de la Renta collaboration. But before that time, the designers behind the scenes were just being inspired by various looks. There was no real credit to be offered, at least not publicly.
I think we had a question over here.
So I'm a really big Barbie collector, so I have a lot of dolls that are heavily vintage from 1960 and on. I noticed some of the, your exhibit is absolutely mind-blowing, by the way. I was stunned in shock. I've been there 3 times already. It's the clothing, the garments, everything is just fascinating and beautiful. I did notice that some of the dolls didn't have complete outfits, and I know that's probably because David didn't have them. Is that something that you are looking to curate later on, or if, like, are you looking for donations to get some of those outfits complete on a loan basis or something?
Right.
Because I have some of those, and I'm like, why is she missing a coat?
That's funny. Right. Yeah, there are some instances where, for instance, we decided not to put on a big fur shawl, a faux fur shawl or something, because I felt like it distracted from the silhouette that I really wanted the viewer to look at. But in general, he has most of we spent a lot of time, we collected everything, but as we were pulling the exhibit together, there were some pieces that we left off just because it wasn't working for any particular, reason. But we don't, there's only a single replica that we show in the entire exhibit, and that's the 1959 compact case for Roman Holiday. That's the only replica. In terms of that 59 to 99, everything going forward is fairly modern, not that hard to get. So yeah, some of them are not totally complete, but usually they're not complete for things like stoles or pieces that sort of covered too much of the foundation of the main garment.
You did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Wonderful part in the exhibition where we see a photograph from the late 60s, early 70s, and it's looking at the skirt evolution from the maxi to the mini, and Barbie is right in step with that, following that same progression. And that, to me, is really one of those underlining moments of why is Barbie in the art museum? Why is she in the gallery? Well, she's a direct link to these important changes in fashion. Those are the stories that we're telling and investigating. Another question.
I was curious if you just collected everything you could find, or if you used some portions of what was going on in real time in society to curate the looks, because I feel like the looks really encapsulate what was going on, and Barbie was really kind of forward thinking and ahead of her time in many instances in society, and I wondered if that inspired some of the looks that you chose to curate.
Well, I started with, so my thesis was that Barbie's fashion was directly influenced from the culture. Now, you would think to yourself, well, that's assumed, isn't it? But no one ever studied it. No one actually proved it. And so that's what this exhibition does, is it in fact shows that what was happening in the life-size world, in our world, was in fact was the inspiration for a Barbie look that would come out the following year. So the way that it was curated was really to tell the story of the evolution of fashion over that period of time, 59 through 99. So there are significant moments in culture that are tipping points where a new fashion fad happens or a new cultural celebrity makes the scene. So those moments in time are visited in this exhibit that helps pull you towards the future. So looking at that 59 to 99, there are some, the whole 60s mod era is like irresistible right now to my eye. I think it's always been irresistible to me, but I think it's, it's all stuff that we, if we could get away with it, we would put on today and wear around. So I think that's probably the cyclical nature of fashion in a way. But so yes, it was curated with this narrative in mind that let's in fact prove that in fact the Barbie design team were looking to culture to design for Barbie, and that in fact Barbie is a reflection of Western culture during this period of time.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question up here?
Did David share any particularly wondrous collection story? He must have had stories about how he found them or the people from whom he got them or how.
There are so many fascinating stories here. And like I said, because there were some things that I really wanted to show in the exhibit, that his example and his collection wasn't in great shape, or it was the shade of the shoe had been, had changed over time from the sun or for whatever reason. We were shopping online to fill in with pieces. And I remember at one point in time, there was a particular shoe that we needed to find. We had one shoe. We didn't have the second shoe. And David spent like weeks and weeks and weeks trolling every day, looking on all the sites for this one shoe. And we finally found the one shoe. And guess how much it cost? It was like $25 for one Barbie shoe. Now, it wasn't a particularly rare shoe, but it was an important shoe for our exhibition. And of course, we tried until the very last second to try to find the original compact from '59. And they're just disappeared. They're just gone. So that was a sad loss. But there was another example where in fact, one of the Yves Saint Laurent inspirations we found, and I fell in love with it because I found the exact outfit walking down the Saint Laurent runway at some point. And so I was very intent that we find this Barbie look. And this Barbie look didn't happen to be in David's collection because it was a European offering, which makes sense, right? And so we spent a lot of time trying to locate that look. And then when we finally did, Mattel swore that it wasn't theirs. They had never seen it before. It wasn't, again, because their archives are so spare, they weren't aware of it. So that was super exciting for them to find a piece of their legacy missing. I think that probably this exhibit and the book is a great boon for their archive. I think it may have lit a fire under them a little bit and realized what they didn't know. And hopefully now going forward, they're very careful about collecting and saving not just the objects, but the supporting manuscript collections that can help tell this story going forward. So that, like, for instance, the Zacco story. I mean, how fascinating would that be to know the real truth behind what happened there? But that's lost to time, at least as far as I know.
Karan, at the end of the exhibition, there is a television that plays some interviews, and one of those is the designer Kitty Black Perkins. And can you speak a little bit about the work and the contribution she did and that how that's really affected Mattel's diversification of the doll?
So Kitty is, she created the very first black Barbie doll. Now we meet two other black skinned dolls before 1980, which is when the first black Barbie doll was sold. But they are not called Barbie, which is very significant for Mattel at that point. We meet Christy and we meet Julie, and they are black women dolls, but they are not Barbie. So our very first Barbie doll is created by Kitty, who happens to be a black woman, and released in 1980. In that same year, we received from Mattel the very first Hispanic Barbie doll. 1980 is significant for Mattel, and that's just a tipping point for Mattel. Thereafter, Barbie, as you know, appears in every color under the sun. Purple and blue next, I'm sure. So that's super significant, and it is a part of the Mattel legacy that isn't particularly flattering, the fact that it took until 1980, but it is a part of their legacy. And I feel Mattel has done a really great job moving forward in trying to rectify and be inclusive with all the dolls. I mean, it's so great now. You can get a doll of any shape you can imagine. It's just, it's off the charts great. So, but it was very important to the Mattel team that we feature those girls and to make sure that we draw attention to the fact that they were in fact released in. Thank you.